The flour dust hung in the air like snow as Sarah Mitchell's hands shook so violently that she could barely press the dough against the wooden counter, and she knew that if she didn't finish these loaves by sundown, the 15 hungry ranch hands expecting their supper would go without bread for the third night in a row. Her arms burned with exhaustion, muscles screaming from hours of kneading. But she forced herself to continue the rhythmic push and fold that her mother had taught her before fever took her 6 months ago. The ranch kitchen was sweltering in the Arizona heat of July 1882, and sweat dripped down Sarah's temple as she tried to ignore the trembling that had started in her shoulders and spread down to her fingertips. She had been awake since 3 that morning, tending to her father who lay in the bedroom upstairs, his leg shattered from a fall off his horse 2 weeks prior. The doctor had set the bone, but infection had taken hold, and Sarah spent her nights changing bandages soaked with fever sweat while spending her days trying to keep the ranch running. The Double M Ranch had been her family's pride for 20 years, carved out of harsh, desert land through her father's determination and her mother's unwavering support. Now, with her mother gone and her father bedridden, the weight of it all pressed down on Sarah's 22-year-old shoulders like a physical thing. The ranch hands were good men, but they expected meals, and the neighboring ranchers were circling like vultures, waiting for the Mitchell family to fail so they could snap up the land and water rights for pennies on the dollar. Sarah's vision blurred as she pushed against the dough again, her arms giving an involuntary shake that sent a puff of flour into the air. She blinked hard, trying to focus, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. She had not slept more than a few hours in days, catching moments of rest in the chair beside her father's bed between his fevered ramblings and cries of pain. The bread had to be perfect because it was one of the few things she could control in a world that seemed determined to crumble around her. The kitchen door swung open with a creak, and Sarah didn't bother to look up. It would be one of the hands coming to ask about supper or to report another problem that she had no energy to solve. The ranch was falling apart in small ways, fences that needed mending, a well that was running dry, cattle that had wandered into the far pastures and needed rounding up. "Miss Mitchell," a deep voice said, unfamiliar and rough around the edges. Sarah's head snapped up and she found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, dust covering his clothes from the trail. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent long days in the saddle. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked to be around 26 or 27, and there was something about the way he held himself that spoke of capability and quiet confidence. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She was too tired for pleasantries or unexpected visitors. "Name's Jesse Crawford," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "I heard in town that your father might be looking for hands. I'm good with horses and cattle, can fix most anything that breaks, and I work hard." Sarah felt her arms trembling harder and pressed them against the dough to hide the shaking. "We're not hiring right now," she said, though it was a lie. They desperately needed help, but there was no money to pay anyone new. Her father had spent their savings on medical bills, and the next cattle sale was months away. Jesse's eyes moved from her face to her shaking arms, and something shifted in his expression. It was not pity exactly, but something gentler, a kind of understanding that made Sarah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I heard your father took a bad fall," Jesse said quietly, "and that your mother passed some time back. That's a heavy load for one person to carry." "We're managing," Sarah said. But even as the words left her mouth, her arms gave another violent tremor, and the dough slipped from her grasp, landing on the counter with a soft thud. She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. She was so tired, bone-tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The sound of boots crossing the wooden floor made her eyes open, and she found Jesse standing beside her, close enough that she could smell the dust and leather and something else, something clean like sage. He looked at the dough, then at her trembling arms, and without asking permission, he gently moved her aside and placed his hands on the dough. "I don't need your help," Sarah protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you don't," Jessie said, beginning to knead with strong, sure movements. "But I'm offering it anyway." Sarah stared at him, too stunned to speak. Cowboys did not bake bread. It was women's work, beneath the dignity of men who roped steers and broke horses. Yet here was this stranger, his large calloused hands working the dough with surprising gentleness, his movements a bit awkward but determined. "You don't know what you're doing," Sarah said, watching him fold the dough incorrectly. "Then teach me," Jessie said, glancing at her with a small smile. "I said I'd learn to bake, and I meant it. A man should know how to feed himself, seems to me. My mother tried to teach me once, but I was too stubborn to pay attention. Figured it out on the trail, though. That pride doesn't fill an empty belly." Sarah found herself moving closer, her hands reaching out to adjust his grip. "Not so hard," she said softly. "You want to press and fold, not tear. The dough needs to stay smooth." Jessie followed her instructions, his hands slowing, becoming more careful. Sarah's arms still trembled, but having him there, taking over the work that had been crushing her, created a space for her to breathe. She talked him through the process, showing him how to turn the dough, how to feel when it had been kneaded enough. And Jessie listened with an intensity that suggested he actually cared about learning. "Why would a cowboy want to learn to bake?" Sarah asked after several minutes of working in companionable silence. Jessie was quiet for a moment, his hands continuing their steady rhythm. "I spent 5 years on the trail driving cattle from Texas up to Kansas," he said finally. "Lost my family's ranch after my father died, and my brother drank away what we had left. Been working for wages since, moving from place to place. You learn quick that the skills folks say are beneath you are the ones that keep you alive when you're alone under the stars with nothing but a campfire and your horse." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance that life had dealt him hardships and he had survived them. Sarah recognized that tone because she had heard it in her own voice lately, that flat acknowledgement that the world was difficult and complaining about it would not change anything. "I'm sorry about your family's ranch," Sarah said. Jessie shrugged. "It's in the past. Can't change what's done, only decide what comes next." He glanced at her, his gray eyes meeting hers. "What about you? How are you holding all this together?" Sarah felt the walls she had built around her emotions start to crack. No one had asked her that, not directly. The ranch hands avoided her eyes and mumbled their thanks for meals. The neighbors offered vague sympathies, but no real help. The doctor gave her instructions for her father's care, but never asked how she was managing the burden of it all. "I'm not," she admitted, the words coming out in a whisper. "I'm barely sleeping. My father is getting worse, not better, and I don't know how to run a ranch. My mother handled the house, and I helped her. But the business side, the decisions about cattle and water rights and when to sell, that was all my father. The men are looking to me for answers I don't have, and I'm terrified that we're going to lose everything my parents built." Jessie stopped kneading and turned to face her fully. "Then let me help," he said. "I won't take wages if you can't afford them. Just food and a place in the bunkhouse. In return, I'll do whatever needs doing. I can handle the men, manage the herds, and I'll learn to bake bread so you can get some sleep." Sarah wanted to say no, wanted to cling to her pride and her independence, but she was drowning, and here was someone offering her a rope. "Why would you work for free?" she asked suspiciously. "What do you get out of it?" "A place to stop running," Jessie said simply. "I'm tired of drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots. Maybe I could find something here worth staying for." The way he looked at her when he said it made Sarah's breath catch. There was no presumption in his gaze, no assumption that she owed him anything. But there was interest, a quiet question that he was not quite asking yet. "1 month," Sarah said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. "Help us for 1 month, And if my father recovers enough to take back over, we'll find a way to pay you properly." "Deal," Jesse said and extended his hand. Sarah placed her still trembling hand in his, and his grip was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of her life. They shook once, formally, and then Jesse turned back to the dough with renewed determination. "Now," he said, "tell me what I'm supposed to do with this next." Sarah showed him how to shape the dough into loaves, how to place them in the greased pans, how to cover them with cloth for the final rise. Jesse's hands were too large and clumsy at first, his loaves lopsided and uneven, but he kept trying. And by the fourth attempt, he had created something that resembled proper bread. "They're not pretty," Jesse said, examining his work critically. "They don't have to be pretty," Sarah said, surprised to find herself almost smiling. "They just have to feed hungry men." While the bread rose, Jesse insisted that Sarah sit down and drink some water. She protested, listing all the tasks that still needed completing, but Jesse was immovable. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion," he said firmly. "And sit, drink. Tell me what needs doing around here, and I'll start on it tomorrow." So Sarah sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where she had eaten countless meals with her parents, and she told Jesse about the broken fence in the north pasture, the well that was running low, the cattle that needed rounding up before they wandered onto the neighboring spread. She told him about the ranch hands, who they were, which ones could be trusted with responsibility, and which ones needed watching. Jesse listened to everything, asked smart questions, and made mental notes that she could see him filing away for later. The bread finished rising, and Jesse, following Sarah's instructions, put the loaves in the cast-iron oven that dominated one side of the kitchen. The smell that began to fill the room 40 minutes later was heavenly, yeasty and warm and comforting in a way that made Sarah realize how much she had been surviving on coffee and worry. When Jesse pulled the loaves out, they were golden brown and only slightly lopsided. He looked at them with such pride that Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten in the hard months since her mother's death. "I made bread," Jesse said, sounding amazed. "You did," Sarah confirmed, and this time she did smile. A real smile that felt strange on her face after so long. They ate supper with the ranch hands that evening, and Sarah introduced Jesse as a new hire. The men were curious but accepting, especially when they saw the bread. It was not as good as Sarah's usual loaves, but it was fresh and hot, and after 3 days of meals without it, the hands ate every crumb. After supper, Sarah went upstairs to check on her father. Michael Mitchell was a big man, made bigger by his reputation as a fair but tough rancher, but illness had hollowed him out. His face was gray, his eyes sunken, and when Sarah placed her hand on his forehead, his skin burned with fever. "Sarah?" he murmured, his eyes opening briefly. "The cattle?" "They're fine, Papa," Sarah said softly, wringing out a cloth in the basin of cool water beside his bed. "Everything is fine, you just rest." "Can't rest," her father said, trying to sit up and falling back with a groan. "The ranch needs me." "The ranch has me," Sarah said, pressing the cool cloth to his forehead. "And I hired a new hand today. Jesse Crawford. He seems capable." Her father's eyes focused on her with unexpected sharpness. "Don't know that name. He trustworthy?" Sarah realized she had no idea, that she had taken an enormous risk letting a stranger onto their property, but something in her gut said Jesse was exactly what he appeared to be, a man looking for a place to belong. "I think so," she said. "He helped me bake bread." Her father's cracked lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "A cowboy who bakes. That's something your mother would have liked." The mention of her mother brought a lump to Sarah's throat. "He's going to help manage things while you recover," she said, "so you don't need to worry about anything except getting better." Her father's hand found hers, his grip weak but determined. "You're stronger than you know, little girl," he said. "Your mother always said you had steel in your spine. I'm seeing it now." Sarah stayed with him until he drifted back into restless sleep, then made her way back downstairs. The house was quiet, the hands having retreated to the bunkhouse for the evening. Sarah was about to go to her own room when she saw lamplight in the kitchen and found Jessie sitting at the table studying a piece of paper. "What are you doing?" she asked. Jessie looked up, not seeming surprised to see her. "Making a list," he said. "Things that need fixing, tasks that should be done first. Thought I'd start before dawn tomorrow, get a jump on the work." Sarah moved closer and saw that his handwriting was surprisingly neat, each item carefully printed. He had organized the tasks by urgency and had already sketched out a rough schedule for the week. "You don't waste time," she observed. "Can't afford to," Jessie said. "Not when there's this much to do." He set down his pencil and looked at her. "How's your father?" "Not good," Sarah admitted, too tired to pretend otherwise. "The infection is getting worse. I'm afraid that if it doesn't turn soon, the doctor will want to take the leg." Jessie's expression darkened. "That's a hard thing." "It would kill him," Sarah said quietly. "Not the amputation itself, but losing the ability to ride, to work his own land. This ranch is his whole life." "Then we'll make sure it's here for him when he recovers," Jessie said with a certainty that made Sarah want to believe him. "You don't even know us," Sarah said. "Why do you care so much?" Jessie was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said finally. "And because when I walked into that kitchen today and saw you shaking so hard you could barely stand but refusing to quit, I saw someone worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Sarah's heart beat faster, and she did not know what to say. Men had expressed interest in her before, sons of neighboring ranchers looking to combine properties, cowboys passing through who liked her face. But no one had ever looked at her the way Jessie was looking at her now, like she was something rare and precious and strong all at once. "I should sleep," Sarah said, because the moment felt too big, and she was too tired to examine what she was feeling. "You should," Jessie agreed, "and I'll be up before dawn to start on that north fence. If your father wakes and asks for you, one of the hands can fetch me and I'll come get you." It was a small thing, that offer to let her sleep through the night, but it felt enormous. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice, and made her way to her room. She fell asleep almost instantly, the image of Jessie's steady hands kneading dough playing behind her closed eyes. True to his word, Jessie was up before dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of horses being saddled and men's voices in the yard. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find that someone, almost certainly Jessie, had left a pot of coffee warming on the stove and a plate of leftover bread with butter. Sarah ate quickly and checked on her father, who was still sleeping, his fever perhaps slightly lower than the night before. She changed his bandages, noting with relief that the wound looked marginally better, less angry and seeping. Maybe the infection was finally starting to respond to the poultices the doctor had prescribed. By the time Sarah made it outside, the sun was painting the sky pink and gold, and most of the hands had already ridden out. She found Jessie near the barn, conferring with Hank, the oldest of the ranch hands and the most experienced. "Morning, Miss Mitchell," Hank said, touching his hat brim. "Jessie here says he wants to tackle that north fence today. I told him it's a 2-day job at least." "Then we'll work until dark and finish it tomorrow," Jessie said calmly. "Can't have cattle wandering off because we've got gaps big enough to drive a wagon through." Hank looked at Sarah as if expecting her to countermand Jessie's orders, but Sarah just nodded. "Sounds like a good plan," she said. "Hank, can you take Tom and Billy with you? Jessie, you should take Pete and Sam. They're the youngest and strongest." Jessie nodded, and Sarah saw approval in Hank's eyes. The old cowboy had been worried about Sarah's ability to lead, but she was showing him that she could make decisions and back them up. The men rode out, and Sarah spent the morning doing the endless tasks that kept a ranch household running. She did laundry, scrubbing shirts and sheets in the big copper tub out back. She weeded the vegetable garden that her mother had planted and that Sarah was determined to keep alive. She made stew for the evening meal, a huge pot of beef and vegetables and beans that would feed 15 hungry men. And throughout it all, she found her mind wandering to Jessie. She wondered how the fence repair was going, whether he was as capable as he seemed, whether the men were accepting his authority. Most of all, She wondered why his presence in her kitchen the day before had felt so significant, like the start of something that could not be stopped. The men returned at dusk, covered in dust and sweat, and the younger hands were groaning about aching muscles. But Jesse looked satisfied, and when Sarah asked how it went, he reported that they had made excellent progress and would finish the fence the next day as planned. Over supper, Sarah noticed that the men were responding to Jesse with the kind of respect usually reserved for foremen. He had a natural authority, but it was tempered with fairness and a willingness to work as hard as anyone else. The hands appreciated that, and Sarah could see them relaxing in ways they had not since her father's accident. After the meal, Jesse appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Want to teach me to make that stew?" he asked. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this learning to cook thing?" "I'm serious about being useful," Jesse corrected. "If you're going to spend time caring for your father, someone needs to be able to feed the men. Might as well be me." So Sarah found herself once again standing beside Jesse, this time showing him how to brown meat, how to cut vegetables, how to layer flavors. Jesse absorbed every instruction, asked questions about timing and seasoning, and looked genuinely interested in the alchemy of turning raw ingredients into a meal. "My mother would have liked you," Sarah said without thinking. Jesse glanced at her. "Why's that?" "She always said that the measure of a man was not just what he could do with a rope and a gun, but what he could do with his hands and his heart. You're not afraid to learn new things, even things that other men would mock you for." "Other men are idiots," Jesse said bluntly. "Refusing to learn something useful because of pride is the fastest way to stay ignorant." Sarah laughed, a real laugh that surprised her. Jesse grinned, clearly pleased to have drawn that sound from her. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Jesse worked from before dawn until after dark, fixing everything that was broken and organizing the men with quiet efficiency. In the evenings, he would appear in the kitchen, and Sarah would teach him to cook. He learned to make biscuits and gravy, fried chicken and mashed potatoes, apple pie from the dried fruit in the pantry. His initial attempts were often disasters, but he never got discouraged, just cleaned up the mess and tried again. And slowly, Sarah felt the crushing weight on her shoulders begin to lighten. Her father's infection finally broke, the fever receding and the wound beginning to heal properly. The doctor, when he came to check, expressed cautious optimism that Michael Mitchell would keep his leg and eventually walk again. The ranch began to look like itself again. Fences mended, buildings repaired, cattle rounded up and properly managed. The hands were happier, working hard, but no longer with the undercurrent of anxiety that had permeated everything when they thought the ranch was failing. And Sarah found herself watching for Jesse, listening for his voice, feeling her heart lift when he walked into a room. They talked about everything during those evening cooking lessons. Jesse told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother who had been a teacher before she married, and who had insisted all her children learn to read and write and think. He told her about losing the ranch, about the years on the trail, about the loneliness of never having a place to call home. Sarah told him about growing up on the Double M, about her mother's gentle strength and her father's gruff affection. She told him about the fear she had felt when her mother died, the terror of being alone with the responsibility of caring for her father. She told him things she had never told anyone about her dreams of making the ranch into something even bigger, of proving that a woman could run a spread as well as any man. "You're already proving that," Jesse said one evening as they rolled out pie crust together. "The men respect you. They see how hard you work, how smart you are. You've kept this place together through circumstances that would have broken someone weaker." "I would have broken if you had not shown up," Sarah said honestly. "I was at the end of my strength when you walked through that door." Jesse's hands stilled on the rolling pin, and he turned to look at her. They were standing close in the small kitchen, flour dusting both of them, the evening light slanting through the window and painting everything gold. "I'm glad I was there," Jesse said quietly. "I'm glad I got to be the one to help you." Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. They had been dancing around this for weeks, this growing attraction, this sense that something profound was developing between them. But neither had spoken it aloud, both too cautious, too aware of the complications. "Jesse," Sarah started, but he shook his head gently. "I know," he said. "It's too soon, too complicated. You've got your father to think about, the ranch to worry about. I'm just a hired hand with nothing to my name. But Sarah, I need you to know that I'm not planning on leaving when the month is up. I want to stay here if you'll have me. Not just because of the ranch, but because of you." Sarah's hand moved of its own accord, reaching up to touch Jesse's face. His stubble was rough under her palm, and his eyes closed briefly at her touch. "I want you to stay," she whispered. "I want it more than I should, more than is probably smart, but I can't imagine this place without you anymore." Jesse turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, gentle and reverent. "Then I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you want me." The moment stretched between them, full of promise and possibility. Then Jesse stepped back, his grin crooked and a little self-deprecating. "But first, I need to learn how to make a pie crust that does not taste like saddle leather." Sarah laughed, the tension breaking into something warmer and lighter. "Your last attempt was not that bad." "Liar," Jesse said, but he was smiling. They finished the pie together, their hands brushing as they worked, and when Sarah finally pulled it from the oven golden and perfect, Jesse looked at it like it was a work of art. The hands raved about the pie at supper, and Jesse accepted their compliments with good-natured embarrassment. After the meal, Sarah was helping to clean up when her father called from upstairs. She hurried to his room and found him sitting up in bed looking more alert than he had in weeks. "Sarah," he said, "help me to the window. I want to see the ranch." Sarah supported his weight as her father, leaning heavily on her in a crutch the doctor had provided, hobbled to the window. He looked out over the land, his land, and Sarah saw his eyes filling with tears. "It looks good, Eve," he said hoarsely. "Better than it has in months. That was Crawford's doing." "Jesse," Sarah said. "Yes, he has been working harder than anyone. The men follow him, respect him." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "He's sweet on you," he finally said. Sarah felt her cheeks heat. "Papa?" "Don't papa me," Michael Mitchell said, but there was affection in his voice. "I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, and I've seen the way you look at him. Your mother would say that's how it should be. Two people choosing each other based on what they see in each other's hearts, not what they can gain from a marriage." "We have not talked about marriage," Sarah protested. "You will," her father said confidently. "That man is not the kind to trifle with a woman's affections. He'll ask properly when the time is right. Question is, what will you say?" Sarah helped her father back to bed, her mind whirling. She had been so focused on day-to-day survival that she had not let herself think about the future in concrete terms. But now, with her father on the mend and the ranch stabilizing, the future was suddenly real and full of possibilities. That night, she dreamed of Jesse, of his hands on hers, teaching her to rope cattle the way she had taught him to knead bread. She dreamed of building a life together, of children running through the ranch house, of growing old side by side under the big Arizona sky. The next morning, Jesse was waiting for her in the kitchen with fresh coffee and a slightly lopsided batch of biscuits that he had made himself. "Thought I'd let you sleep in," he said. "You've been looking tired." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully and bit into a biscuit. It was a bit dry but edible, a vast improvement over his first attempts. "These are good," she said. "You're being kind," Jesse said, "but I'll take the compliment." He hesitated, then added, "Your father was at the window last night. I saw him. He looks stronger." "He is," Sarah said. "The doctor thinks he'll be able to walk with a cane within a few months. He won't be riding or doing heavy work for a while, but he is going to recover." "That's wonderful news," Jesse said, and he meant it. But there was something in his expression, a shadow of worry. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. Jesse set down his coffee cup carefully. "I'm glad your father's recovering," he said, "but I need to know, Sarah. When he's back on his feet, when he can run the ranch again, will you still want me here?" Sarah set her own cup down and moved around the table to stand in front of Jesse. She took his hands in hers, these hands that had learned to knead bread and roll pie crust, that had mended fences and gentled horses and held hers in the evening light. "I will always want you here," she said firmly. "Not as a hired hand, not as someone filling in until my father recovers. I want you here as a partner, as someone who has just as much stake in this ranch as I do, as someone I am falling in love with." Jesse's breath hitched, and his hands tightened on hers. "Sarah." "I know it's fast," Sarah continued, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I know we have only known each other a month, but in that month, you have become the best part of my days. You have shown me what it means to have a true partner, someone who does not see me as weak or incapable, but as strong and worthy. I don't want to go back to how things were before you came. I want to move forward with you beside me." Jesse stood, pulling Sarah into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart pounding as hard as hers. "I love you," Jesse said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you in that kitchen, exhausted and shaking, but too stubborn to give up. You are the strongest, most beautiful, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you." Sarah pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You already have," she said. Jesse kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. Sarah had been kissed before, quick stolen kisses from boys at dances, but nothing had ever felt like this. This felt like coming home, like finding the piece of herself she had not known was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "I should ask your father's permission," Jesse said, "the proper way." "He already knows," Sarah said. "He told me last night that you would ask when the time was right." "Smart man," Jesse said, "but I'm still going to do it properly. You deserve that." That evening, after supper, Jesse asked to speak with Michael Mitchell privately. Sarah waited downstairs, pacing the kitchen and trying not to imagine all the ways her father might object. Yes, he had seemed accepting the night before, but asking for a daughter's hand was a serious matter. 20 minutes later, Jesse came back down the stairs looking relieved and happy. "He said yes," Jesse announced, "though he did threaten to shoot me if I ever hurt you." "That sounds like Papa," Sarah said, laughing through the tears that had started to fall. Jesse crossed to her and dropped to one knee, taking her hand in his. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, "I don't have a ring yet, and I don't have much to offer you besides my hands and my heart and a promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. But will you marry me? Will you let me stay here and help you build this ranch into everything you dream it can be?" "Yes," Sarah said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and only slightly yellowed with age. Jesse wore new clothes purchased in town, black trousers and a white shirt, and a black vest that made him look handsome and serious. The ranch hands all attended, cleaned up, and on their best behavior, and several neighbors came as well. Michael Mitchell, leaning on his cane but standing on his own 2 feet, walked Sarah down the makeshift aisle and gave her away with tears in his eyes. The circuit preacher spoke about love and commitment and partnership, and when Jesse slipped a simple gold band on Sarah's finger, she felt her mother's presence like a blessing in the room. They celebrated with a feast that Jesse and Sarah had prepared together, roasted beef and fresh vegetables from the garden and pies and cakes, and the best bread Sarah had ever tasted because Jesse had made it himself, his skill now nearly equal to her own. As the sun set and the guests began to drift away, Jesse took Sarah's hand and led her outside. The desert air was cooling, the sky painted in shades of purple and orange, and the land stretched out around them peaceful and beautiful. "Happy?" Jesse asked, pulling Sarah close. "Happier than I knew I could be," Sarah said honestly. You gave me my life back when you walked into that kitchen. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a home, Jessie countered. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me everything. They stood together watching the stars begin to appear, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the grief of losing her mother, the fear of losing her father, and the ranch, the exhaustion that had nearly broken her. And then Jessie, appearing like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. My arms were trembling, Sarah said softly, and Marin, you took over. You said you would learn to bake, and you did. You learned to bake and to cook and to care. You learned to be exactly what I needed. We learned together, Jessie said. You taught me to make a home. I taught you that you don't have to carry everything alone. We're partners, Sarah, in every way that matters. Sarah turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Jessie rested his forehead against hers. Come on, Mrs. Crawford, he said with a grin. Let's go home. And hand in hand they walked back to the ranch house, to the life they would build together. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Michael Mitchell recovered enough to oversee the ranch from the porch, offering advice and wisdom while Jessie and Sarah did the physical work. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Sarah's sharp mind for business, combining with Jessie's skill with horses and cattle, to make the Double M one of the most successful spreads in the territory. 3 years after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to a son they named Michael, after her father. The baby had Jessie's gray eyes and Sarah's determination, and from the moment he was born, he was the light of their lives. Michael grew up running through the ranch, learning to ride almost before he could walk, and his grandfather doted on him shamelessly. 2 years later, Sarah had twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who had their father's dark hair and their mother's spirit. The ranch house rang with children's laughter, and Jessie proved to be as patient and loving a father as he was a husband. Sarah's father lived to see all 3 grandchildren grow old enough to sit on his knee and hear his stories about the early days of the ranch. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, 10 years after Jessie had first arrived, and at his funeral, the whole community turned out to pay their respects to a man who had carved a life out of hard land through determination and fairness. Jessie and Sarah grieved his loss but took comfort in knowing that Michael Mitchell had died happy, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that his ranch would continue for generations. Sarah took over full ownership of the Double M, renaming it the Double MC to include Jessie's name. Under their leadership, the ranch expanded, acquiring neighboring properties as they became available and developing a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Jessie never stopped cooking. Even as the ranch grew and they could afford to hire a cook for the hands, Jessie still appeared in Sarah's kitchen regularly, making bread and pies and experimenting with new recipes. It became their time together. Those evening hours when the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, when they could work side by side and talk about their day. Do you ever miss the trail? Sarah asked him once, years into their marriage. The freedom of moving from place to place? Jessie looked at her, his eyes crinkling with affection and certainty. Not for a single second, he said. I found everything I was searching for when I found you. This ranch, our children, the life we have built together, this is freedom. This is home. Sarah kissed him, tasting flour and love, and thought about that day so many years ago when she had stood in the kitchen with trembling arms, certain that she was going to lose everything. She thought about Jessie walking through the door, a stranger offering help without expectation of reward. She thought about how he had taken over kneading the dough, how he had said he would learn to bake, and how that simple act of service had been the beginning of the greatest love she would ever know. Their children grew up strong and capable. Michael became a skilled rancher in his own right, eventually taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own spread, while Grace showed an unexpected talent for business and handled all the contracts and sales for the Double MC. Sarah and Jessie grew older together, their hands becoming weathered and scarred, their hair turning gray, but their love only deepening with time. They had arguments and disagreements, challenges and setbacks, but they faced everything together. True partners in every sense of the word. On their 30th anniversary, Jesse surprised Sarah by baking a perfect replica of their wedding cake, a towering confection that would have seemed impossible for the man who had struggled to make a simple loaf of bread 3 decades earlier. "You have gotten pretty good at this," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time as she looked at the beautiful cake. "I had a good teacher," Jesse said, pulling her into his arms, "and excellent motivation. Everything I learned because I wanted to make your life easier. I wanted to be worthy of you." "You were always worthy," Sarah said fiercely, "from the very first moment." They celebrated that anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, the ranch house full to bursting with the family they had created. As Sarah looked around at all the faces, saw the love and security and happiness that filled her home, she sent up a silent thank you to her mother and father, whose hard work had built the foundation, and to Jesse, who had saved it all when she thought it was lost. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Sarah and Jesse stood on the porch watching the sun set over land that would belong to their family for generations to come. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" Jesse asked. "On our wedding night?" "I remember everything about that day," Sarah said. "I remember thinking that I was the luckiest woman alive." "I was the lucky one," Jesse corrected. "A drifter with nothing to his name, taken in by the most incredible woman in Arizona." "We were both lucky," Sarah said, settling the argument the way she always did, by being practical. "We found each other when we both needed finding." "That's not luck, that's fate." Jesse kissed the top of her head, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear. The desert air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. "I love you," Jesse said, the words as sincere and heartfelt as they had been 30 years earlier. "I love you too," Sarah replied. "Thank you for teaching me to let someone help. Thank you for learning to bake. Thank you for every single day we have had together." "Thank you for trembling arms," Jesse said with gentle humor. "Thank you for being too stubborn to quit but wise enough to accept help when it was offered. Thank you for building this life with me." They went inside together to the house that was full of memories and love, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades. And as Sarah fell asleep in Jesse's arms, she thought about how a single moment, a single act of kindness and humility had changed the course of her entire life. Jesse had walked into her kitchen when her arms were trembling and she could not go on. He had taken over kneading the dough and said he would learn to bake. And in doing so, he had not just saved her bread, he had saved her ranch, her future, and her heart. It was, Sarah thought as sleep claimed her, the best decision anyone had ever made. The years continued to roll by, bringing with them the changes that time always brings. Sarah and Jesse celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 50th. Remarkable milestones in a hard land and a difficult era. They buried friends and celebrated births, weathered droughts and good years, and through it all, they remained each other's constant. Michael took full ownership of the ranch when Jesse decided he was ready to step back, though Jesse never really retired. He could be found most days checking on the horses or riding out to inspect fences, unable to stay idle. Sarah continued to manage the books and contracts, her mind as sharp as ever, and together they served as advisors and guides to their children and grandchildren. On a warm evening in early September, when Sarah was 75 and Jesse was 79, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Sarah had been feeling tired lately, her breath coming shorter, but she had refused to see the doctor, insisting it was just age catching up with her. "Jesse," she said quietly, taking his hand, "if I go first, I need you to promise me something." "You're not going anywhere," Jesse said firmly, but his hand tightened on hers. "Promise me you will keep baking," Sarah said. "Promise me you will teach the grandchildren, especially little Sarah. She has the touch for it. Keep that tradition alive. Every time you knead dough, every time you pull bread from the oven, remember the day we met. Remember how we started." "Sarah," Jesse said, his voice breaking. "Promise me," Sarah insisted. I promise, Jessie said, but you're going to be here to help me. We're going to celebrate our 60th anniversary, and I'm going to bake you the biggest cake you have ever seen. Sarah smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. That sounds perfect, she said. But 3 weeks later, Sarah's heart, which had been so strong for so long, finally gave out. She died peacefully in her sleep, with Jessie beside her holding her hand. And when the sun rose on a world without Sarah Mitchell Crawford, Jessie felt like a piece of his soul had been torn away. The funeral was the largest the county had ever seen. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of her community, a successful rancher, a loving mother, and a devoted wife. They told stories of Sarah's kindness and her sharp business sense, her determination, and her compassion. Jessie stood at the graveside, supported by his children, and watched as Sarah was laid to rest beside her parents on a hill overlooking the ranch she had loved. He did not cry, not then, because Sarah would have wanted him to be strong for their family. But that night, alone in the bedroom they had shared for more than 50 years, Jessie wept for the loss of his partner, his love, the woman who had given his life meaning. The days that followed were the hardest of Jessie's life. He moved through them mechanically, getting up because that was what Sarah would have wanted, eating because his children insisted but feeling hollowed out and lost. The ranch continued around him. Life went on, as it always did, but Jessie felt like he was watching it all from a great distance. 3 months after Sarah's death, on what would have been her 76th birthday, Jessie found himself standing in the kitchen. The same kitchen where they had met all those years ago. It had been modernized over the decades, new stoves and better lighting, but the bones of it were the same. Jessie looked at the counter where he had first taken over kneading dough from an exhausted young woman with trembling arms, and he felt Sarah's presence so strongly it took his breath away. He could almost see her standing there, showing him how to fold and press, her patience infinite, and her belief in him unwavering. And Jessie knew what he had to do. He gathered the ingredients, flour and water and salt and yeast, measuring by instinct and memory. He began to knead, his hands, now old and gnarled with arthritis, still remembering the rhythm Sarah had taught him. Push and fold, turn and press, the meditation of creating something from nothing. As he worked, Jessie talked to Sarah, telling her about the grandchildren and the ranch, about how much he missed her, about how empty the world felt without her in it. He told her that he was keeping his promise, that he would keep baking, keep teaching, keep the tradition alive. The bread he made that day was perfect, golden and fragrant, and exactly the way Sarah had always made it. Jessie pulled it from the oven and set it on the counter to cool, and for the first time since her death, he felt something like peace. His granddaughter Sarah, 12 years old and wise beyond her years, appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had been named for her grandmother and had inherited not just her name but her determination and gentle strength. "Grandpa," she said softly, "will you teach me?" Jessie looked at the girl, seeing Sarah's eyes looking back at him, and he felt his heart crack open with love and grief and hope all tangled together. "Come here, little one," he said, and Sarah came to stand beside him at the counter. Jessie showed her how to measure the flour, how to mix the dough, how to knead with patience and care. He told her stories about her grandmother, about the day they met, about how learning to bake had been the beginning of the greatest love story of his life. "Grandma always said you saved her," young Sarah said as she pressed and folded the dough. "We saved each other," Jessie corrected gently. "That's what love is, little one. It's not one person rescuing another. It's two people choosing to face the world together, learning and growing and becoming better versions of themselves." Young Sarah nodded seriously, absorbing the wisdom. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and Jessie felt something shift in his chest. The grief was still there and always would be, but alongside it was gratitude for the years he had been given, for the love he had known, for the family that surrounded him. Jessie lived for 5 more years after Sarah's death, long enough to see young Sarah become a skilled baker and passed the tradition on to her younger cousins. He spent those years surrounded by family, telling stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive through words and bread and love. When Jesse finally passed, it was peacefully, in his sleep, and the family liked to think that Sarah had come to get him, to take him by the hand and lead him home. They buried him beside her on the hill, and on his headstone, along with his name and dates, they carved a simple epitaph that he had requested. He learned to bake for love and found everything he had been searching for. The Double MC Ranch continued to prosper for generations, passed down through the family, and with it passed the story of Jesse and Sarah. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren learned to bake bread in the ranch kitchen, and as they kneaded dough, they heard the story of the cowboy who had walked through the door and offered to help a young woman whose arms were trembling with exhaustion. They heard about how he had taken over kneading the dough and said he would learn to bake, and how that simple act of service and humility had been the beginning of a love that had built a legacy. They learned that true strength was not just in physical ability, but in the willingness to be vulnerable, to learn, to change, to serve. The story became a family legend, told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding and interpretation, but at its heart the story remained the same. A tale of two people who found each other when they both needed finding, who built a life together based on mutual respect and partnership, who proved that love was not about grand gestures, but about daily choices to show up, to help, to learn, to grow together, and in kitchens throughout the family, whenever bread was being made, someone would say, "Remember, this is how great-grandpa Jesse learned to bake. This is how their love story began." The tradition continued. The bread was made. The story was told. And the love that had started with trembling arms and a cowboy willing to learn became the foundation upon which an entire family was built. It was a legacy of love and service, of partnership and respect, of two people who had changed each other's lives with simple acts of kindness and had created something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this world, Jesse and Sarah stood together, watching their family carry on the traditions they had started, and they smiled, because they had done what they set out to do. They had built a home, raised a family, and created a love that would echo through generations. It had all started with a kitchen, a batch of bread, and a cowboy who said he would learn to bake. And in the end, that had made all the difference.